So here is activity life cycle, but what does exactly it means? Uh, Activity life cycle is a concept which is not very new to the programming world. Those who comes from the Servlet JSP world, or those who know a little bit about Servlet and JSP, they know that Servlet JSP has a life cycle. What it means is that the control to execute that is in the web container. So if you go the Servlet world, if you know a little bit about Servlet, we know that servlets will have a life cycle. So servlet life cycle. So it is a very basic, we are not going to discuss detail. It has a method called init. It has the method service. Then there is a do get or do post or do put, and then there is a method also called destroy. Now all of these life cycle method, these are life cycle method. Life cycle methods. These life cycle methods are basically controlled by the container of the servlet. So container of the servlet will first trigger init, then it will trigger service, then it will trigger either of these do get, do post, do put, and when nobody is using the servlet, it will destroy the servlet. The same concept comes for the activity as well. What it means is activity has a life cycle as well. How it works? Like this. So activity will also have a life cycle. What it means is activity life cycle. Activity life cycle is nothing very new or anything, but what it does is that, let me just show you the diagram itself. It might be a little easier. What happens is that when activity starts, these are the life cycle methods, by the way. First life cycle method is on create. Then it is on start. Then it is on resume. And then on pause, on stop, and on destroy. So what does exactly these life cycles mean? When what happens? On create is very obvious. When, and by the way, activity, as I have already mentioned, it is that screen which we created. So this is the activity. Let me just show you one activity for you. Which activity I am referring here? This is the screen. This is the activity I am referring. So this activity has a life cycle, and this one can be done. This one goes through the state of all of this. So this activity first get created by on create. Then when on start happens, it tries to load all the components of this. When on resume happens, basically it is showing everything to the user, and then activity is running. So right now this activity is in the state of running. After some time, it is possible that this activity goes in a state called on pause. Then sometime this activity might go in a state called on stop, and after some time this activity could go in a state called on destroy. So that is the various stages of its life cycle, and at each life cycle a method gets triggered. But what exactly happens, especially in this and this and this, and how the control flows, and that's all we are gonna understand today. So let us come back to this one. On create is obvious, and these are the method. So at every life cycle the method is there. Now this one, get triggered, this method get triggered when it is created. Okay. Now this method get triggered on start when something starts, activity starts. So the basic structure like the layout, the buttons and all has to do this. And this is where you start seeing the screen. On resume is just called when you come from here to here, nothing much happens. Just it comes from on start to on resume, nothing. On resume is used especially when it happens on pause, more importantly. Now what exactly happens on this one and this one, this will help you to understand these two as well. So what we are going to do is that we are going to understand what exactly happened at on pause. When does the activity come to a state called on pause? On pause is the state the activity comes into when a particular activity is partially covered by another activity. So what it means is that let us assume that this is your activity. Okay, so this was your activity and these are the buttons. Okay, now if this activity is covered by another screen, let us assume that another screen covers this. Let us assume another pop-up of a small screen has come. Okay, now if a screen or activity is covered by another screen or activity partly, not fully, then we call it has come to a state called on pause. And when it goes to on pause, the on pause method get triggered automatically. So if you want to build some logic that when somebody covers my screen or pop-up happen, what should happen, then you should put it inside on pause method. Now how does it goes to a state called on stop? So now let us assume that there is a screen like this and this is our screen and few buttons, two buttons. Okay, now if after this screen another screen I opened which covers pretty much the whole, all of the old screen, so this whole screen is covered by another screen. Every time this happens that the old screen is covered completely by another screen, it goes to a state called on stop. So basically your previous activity is invisible. So when the previous activity becomes invisible, it goes to the state called on stop. And on destroy means that activity is about to close or destroy, not close, destroy. Okay, so that is on destroy. Now these are the various states in on create and on start. All of these cases you will find your activity going like this. In this one it will show like this. But what happens, what is the meaning of this? Let us assume here, okay, I understood that on create it is creating, on start it is doing, on resume it is doing, on pause is partly covered, on stop is fully covered, on destroy that happened. Now here is one important concept. What Android does is that it basically tries to optimize on the memory part. on pause, on stop, and on destroy. So there is a unique concept in Android which is not there much in the desktop world or most of the mobile world. What it means is that if a particular screen is not visible, not used by the user, then to save the memory of the phone, Android has something called a process killer. It does not always kill the process, but it does kill the memory activity in a process. So because it kills activity, services, and various other components as well, that's why it is called process killer and not the activity killer. What it means is that if a particular screen is not visible to the user is not doing anything, it is in the background, or there is another screen on an existing screen, so the background screen is not being used by user, and then there is a need for other applications for memory. So if your phone is running low on memory, then these kinds of activity which user is not using can get killed. And if it get killed, what happens if user navigates back to the activity? Let us assume that you press the back button. Then what happens? If that is the case and the activity is killed, then it gets recreated. But does this happen all the time? That you are running out of memory? Not necessarily, right? Your phone may not be running out of memory just because you open 2-3 screens. So what happens when you press the back button and your activity is not killed? So there is two options. In the both pause and on stop, there are two possibilities. Either your memory is low or not low. If it is low, then it will get killed and it will get recreated. If it is not low and you press the back button, and if it comes back with your screen and it is on pause method, then it get triggered this one. Okay. And if it is on stop and it is still not killed and you press the back button and the screen is again visible, then it goes through this method. It calls on restart and then on start and then comes back to this one. So these are basically the behaviors of how the life cycle of an activity is managed. If none of this happens and you are not doing anything, then after on stop, it could also get destroyed as well. So on create, on start, on resume are the various life cycle stages of an Android. Now let me just show you how can you test this whole thing. Whether activity goes through these states or not, if you want to check it yourself in the source code, then what is the way to do that? The way to do this is, you can go into your Android, this one, and you can type here all the methods called, these are the methods. So one method on create we have already seen. You can put on start, okay. Then you can say on stop, and each of these methods you can put here some kind of a log statement, log.v, put life cycle inside on start. Okay. So let us format the when you take the cursor just like that on a particular thing, this pop-up comes. So you have to select import log and it will fix that problem. Here we have to do semicolon, and let us copy this thing into, okay. Now on start, on stop, on pause also we will put. You can press Ctrl and space to show you the list of all the methods which are inherited or extended from the base class or all the top level classes, super classes. So here we will say on pause and put this log statement. We'll talk about log little later, but just to understand. How do you want to test this complete life cycle of an activity? Because understanding the activity of life cycle is pretty important. So if you want to figure out what is going on, so let us start just with this much, okay? So we'll just do save. And we'll put something inside on create as well, because that is also a life cycle state. So on create. Okay. So now let us run this application. And if you, as usual, will keep an eye on this tab called console. It will keep telling me what it is doing, whether it is really going to install and start and all or not. So it has started. Now if you want to see the Logcat log file, you'll find something interesting here. Okay. Now let me just filter out life cycle. See, here it has spit out in the log. It went inside on create and inside on start. Now it has not gone, it has gone to the first two life cycle, okay, on create and on start. Let us do something else. So what I will do is that I will just say home. Okay. Now the moment I said home, what happens? That activity got hidden by another activity that is a home screen or this screen. Now the moment it happens that, what it went inside on pause and on stop. So for a fraction of second it goes to on pause, during which the new activity is trying to cover, and when it is completely covered it went to inside on stop. So this is the life cycle you will see that your screen is going through. So now if I go back, now let us bring that activity again, traveler assistant. Did it call in create again? No, it did not call create, it called inside on start. So if you see here, interesting part, that in the activity life cycle, first inside on create get called, then on start got called, then on pause, on stop, and this happened, basically this happened when I went back to another screen, then these two events got triggered inside the activity. Now when I came back to my own original activity, this method got triggered inside on start. So what it means is that activity has a life cycle, and it has, each of the life cycle has a method, and those methods get triggered depending on what life cycle it has. And this is the way you can figure out yourself. Now coming back to this one. So this one was basically that on create, on start, on resumes. So in the beginning these two happen, So this is where we will be discussing about the activity life cycle. Now that kinds of covers what all are the various activity life cycle and how we can take care of the life cycle itself. Once we understand the basics of life cycle, what it means is that we can build a logic that if my screen, when the screen is first time created, or when the screen is first time launched, or when the screen get hidden, or when the screen get partially hidden, how can I put the business logic? And that is where you will use this method called on pause, on stop. Okay. Now, once we understand this activity life cycle and we saw that how to test it out, let us move to our code base activity dot our activity class.